This video is going to start our ratio lessons, ratio RP 1, 2, and 3. So on this packet, if you haven't already, make sure you have your name on it. You want to label it CFA 3 notes for ratios and proportions. So I labeled it RP 1, 2, and 3. There's 3 standards. This packet in particular is lessons 1 through 8, and we will continue on with some other lessons. So I want to make sure that that's labeled, and then we will get into the actual lessons. So if you turn the page, we'll get started. So the first example is saying that the co-ed soccer team has 4 times as many boys on it as it has girls. We say the ratio of the number of boys to the number of girls on the team is 4 to 1. We read this as 4 to 1. So there's a few things I want to go over when we talk about ratios. You can kind of hear the ratio language. Number of boys to the number of girls, and then they give you the ratio 4 to 1. So if we're going to make a little table here, we would make our table say number of boys, and we'll kind of make the table go across like this, and then we'll say number of girls, and then this last column we'll put total number of players. Total number of players. So the ratio they gave us was 4 to 1. So I'm going to make this 3 rows in our table. Not perfect here. We've got 4 to 1, so 4 boys to 1 girl. So the total number of players would be 5. And then if you were like double the ratio, then you would have 8 boys, 2 girls, and the total number 8 and 2 would be 10. If you were to triple that ratio, 4 to 1, you would have 12 to 3, and the total number of players would be 15. So that's kind of the first example. The next one says, suppose the ratio of the number of boys to the number of girls is 3 to 2. So if that changes, number of boys to number of girls is 3 to 2, then how would our table change? And our table would change because instead of 4 to 1, we're going to put 3 to 2. So let's do that again. Number of, I'll just put B, and then number of G, and then we'll put total number. We'll make a couple rows in this chart as well. So number of boys to girls, so 3 to 2. So make sure you put 3 to 2. Don't say 2 to 3 because that would be backwards. And the total number of players would be 5. If you double the 3 to 2 ratio, then you would have 6 to 4, which is a total of 10. If you tripled that ratio, 3 to 2, then you would have 9 to 6, and then your total would be 15. A couple little things I want to put here in our notes when we're talking about ratios. There's 3 ways to write a ratio. So we're going to kind of put this up here and kind of put a little squiggly line. So 3 ways to write ratios. You can write it with a colon, 3 colon 2, and we read that as 3 to 2. You could write it 3 with the word 2, or you could write it like as a fraction 3 to 2, like that. My favorite is the fraction way when I write ratios. Another way they're going to teach us is a tape diagram. Tape diagram. And if you were doing a 3 to 2 ratio on boys to girls, and remember that ratio was 3 to 2, so I'm going to write that over here just so I have it, 3 to 2. Then in a tape diagram, you draw 3 boxes to 2. What's really important in a tape diagram is that your boxes. Let me try to do this here. So like when you make the girls' boxes, they need to be right below the boys. So this line and this one are the same. And then kind of like that. So that line's the same. So that you can see that this one's one more box larger than this one. So those are some things we're going to talk about with ratios. So we're going to go to some other examples. Write the ratio of the number of boys to the number of girls in our class. And so we could do that by asking and looking around in our class. I'm just going to use the numbers from last year. Last year when I was using it, we only had 12 kiddos because we were in that hybrid system. So we only had half the class. Number of boys to the number of girls. And there were 6 boys to 6 girls. So that's one way to write the ratio. Another way to write it would be with the word 2, 6 to 6. And then the other way was a fraction, 6 over 6. And then if we had to switch it around, number of girls to the number of boys. In this case, it doesn't really get switched around because we had the same number, but you would write it the same way, 6 to 6. 6 to 6 or 6 over 6. And we could put our example with our class on there as well if we wanted to. Turn the page. We'll do another example. These ones here are a little bit more interactive. So I'm going to use last year's numbers, but we could also use our class as well. So if I asked you to stand up if you traveled out of state this last summer, I would count how many people are standing. And the ratio of people standing was 6 people standing to 6 people sitting. And that was asking if you traveled out of state last summer. So then if I ask that question again, but I say stand up if you did not travel out of state last summer, and 6 people stood up that did not to the 6 that did, that's how you would write the ratio. And that would be didn't travel out of state last summer. And again, we could use our numbers, but that was just an example I had before. Stand up if you have at least one sibling. Last year's numbers, 12 kids stood up that had at least one sibling, and that meant 0 were only children or only child. You had at least one sibling. And then I said, okay, stand up if you are an only child, and nobody stood up. So 0 to 12 was the ratio we wrote for you are an only child. And these numbers may look different for our class. Stand up if your favorite class is math. And there were 6 that stood up and 6 that were seated. So 6 to 6 ratio for favorite class is math. So then what would our ratio be if your favorite class is not math? It would also be 6 to 6 for your favorite class is not math. So just some examples of ratios. We're going to cross off that section right there, and we're going to go down to this section down here. We're going to use words to describe a ratio that represents each ratio below. So when I do this, 1 to 12, where do we see these numbers 1 to 12? And we're going to use the ratio language. So we always say for every, that's going to be the ratio language you get used to hearing. For every, what 1 to 12? Well, for every 1 year, if I say it like that, for every 1 year, comma, there are 12 months. And that's just a ratio I was thinking of where 1 to 12 happens. Now, what if they switch it around 12 to 1? What would I say? I would still start with for every, but now I switch it up instead of 12, or instead of 1 to 12, now it's 12 to 1. So for every 12 months, comma, there is 1 year. an example of how you would write ratio. So here's the ratio written in number form, and here's like written word form. We're going to cross off C. We're going to turn the page and go to the next example. We'll cross off D, and we'll do the last two examples, E and F. 10 to 2. So there's a couple things you could think of with 10 and 2. If I said for every 10 toes, you could say there are 2 feet. And that's not the only one. You could have fingers and hands. And then if it switched around 2 to 10, you would say for every 2 feet, comma, there are 10 toes. So what we just learned with ratios there is this is the number form of the ratio, and this is like the word form. So you're hearing these words for every. So the first lesson on ratios is over, and so the lesson summary kind of explains what we just went over with a ratio. It's an ordered pair of numbers. They both cannot be 0. One of them could be 0, but not both. A ratio A to B indicates the order that A has to come first and then B would be second. If it was B to A, then B would have to come first and A would come second. So the order of the numbers is important. You can't just switch the numbers up. So the problem set is going to be the homework for lesson 1. And there's 3 questions there that go with that homework. A couple of them have a couple different parts. So that's one set of homework.